All right, we are live. Adam, you can start when you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We're here for the final push of the Seattle budget process, the People's Budget 2020 movement. We have a really exciting lineup. We're going to get people all prepped and ready to give a powerful public testimony tomorrow, November 17th, for the final budget committee meeting where critical votes are going to take place. And then also the day after for the budget committee, where also final critical votes are being taken, are going to take place. As we do with these community prep meetings, we're going to begin with an introduction, a political contextualization from Councilmember Shama Sawant, who is, of course, helping spearhead this People's Budget movement. Then we're going to hear from Jonathan Rosenblum in our office to give us some updates on what the budget looks like so far, what things we're on set to win and need a final push for, what demands we're continuing to raise and build continued pressure for, and then, of course, the austerity that's being proposed by the Democratic establishment, and of course, which we're fighting against. Then we're going to move on to a whole series of very dynamic community leaders, community speakers from the People's Budget movement. We're going to hear from Reverend Robert Jeffrey on fighting austerity and on building affordable housing, on defunding the police. We're going to hear from a whole range of other speakers. But before going into the entire agenda, why don't we go ahead and, without further ado, let's kick it off with Councilmember Shama Sawant with a political update on how this budget process is going and some of the final push that we need to do to win the maximum gains for working people, communities of color, and offset some of the attempted austerity from the Democratic establishment. So Councilmember Sawant, take it from here, please.
Thank you, Adam, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final People's Budget Community Meeting before City Council members begin to take crucial votes on the 2021 City of Seattle budget. And I wanted to thank in advance all the speakers who are going to speak on this panel. This is the 7th year of our People's Budget movement. Every year, beginning in 2014, community members have organized alongside my Socialist Council office to demand a city budget that meets the needs of working people. We have a 6-year track record of success fighting the political establishment to win important new funding for renter organizing, for affordable housing, especially in Black and Brown communities, for tiny house villages and shelters and other funds for our homeless neighbors, for stronger enforcement of laws protecting workers, for funding for restorative justice, for Indigenous Peoples Day, for low-income seniors, for LGBTQ services, and the list goes on. This year, again, the fall 2020 People's Budget campaign, which includes workers, Black and Brown communities, socialists, rank and file Democratic Party activists, union members, renters, faith community members, environmental justice activists, small business owners, LGBTQ community members, and housing justice activists, is winning crucial gains again. Before I review some of those gains, along with the very real challenges that lie immediately ahead, let me just say that the work of our movement in the last 2 months has been nothing short of extraordinary. We have got organized and we've had hundreds of people play an active role, which is tremendous, especially considering the challenges of organizing during the pandemic and during this economic crisis where so many of the people who are active in the movement have been personally affected by job loss or loss of income. Thousands of letters have demanded that the City Council fund the needs of ordinary people. Hundreds of calls have been made. Council members have been reached out to, and we have engaged many new people who weren't activists before. Many have testified by the hundreds, have signed and circulated petitions, have organized online rallies. Getting organized independent of the political establishment can be really effective, and we have the results again and again to prove that. Because of the work of our People's Budget movement, we are on track to win $500,000 for urgent renter organizing and education, over $600,000 for eviction defense attorneys, $5 million for 4 new tiny house villages, including 1 self-managed village for organizations like Nicholsville, $30 million for anti-displacement community development projects, which was yet another of Mayor Durkan's broken promises, but which our movement is managing to get restored. The full $250,000 of funds that are needed to begin the pre-development work for a very important and exciting project, which is Africa Town's full square block affordable housing on Yasler in the Central District. Also, full funding for the city's Green New Deal Oversight Board, money for 24-hour operations for share and wheel shelters, which so many of our vulnerable community members rely on, funds for low-income senior meals and cultural programming, signage at Licton Springs honoring the site's indigenous history, studies to prepare legislation for standard tenant leases to avoid abusive clauses, and for transferable renter background checks. And I should just say these are important items. They may seem as minor, but they are important because we have laid down an important marker by telling the city, you need to prepare studies for this. I mean, you need to prepare legislation for this, because come January, our renters' rights movement needs to fight to win the standard tenant leases and for transferable renter background checks. And anybody who's ever rented even once in their life knows exactly what I'm talking about and why they are important. We also, by the way, need to close all existing loopholes in the just cause eviction ordinance. And we need to, of course, expand to the larger and the more urgent fight to cancel rent during COVID. And significantly, we have, and this is very, very important for us, that we are on track to win this. None of these things that I'm mentioning are a done deal until the final votes are cast, but we are on track to win them. We have momentum. But this one is really important, which is a formal request to the City of Seattle staff to prepare legislation to enable us to have an elected community oversight board with full powers over the police, including the power to investigate reports of excessive force, racially biased policing, subpoena witnesses and evidence, and fire or otherwise discipline officers. And I'm happy to also report that Seattle will not be the first one doing this, and we are in good company because cities like Portland, Oregon, Columbus, Ohio, many other cities have already won ballot measures in this past election just a few weeks ago. So it is really important that we are moving on that. These budget amendments are all incorporated right now into the proposed budget package from the City Council. So we, of course, have to guard against any last-minute political shenanigans to remove these items, and we've seen that happen before from corporate politicians. So we have to keep speaking up about them. But at this point, we are on the track to win this. This is great progress, and I really hope you take heart from these achievements or near achievements that we have from our movement. I hope you are all feeling energized from hearing that and reinforced that building a movement does yield results. Now, let me share the more sobering budget story with you. While we have been quite successful in winning crucial reforms to the original budget proposal, we still face the prospect of the City Council Democrats approving a budget with draconian cuts to affordable housing and social services, putting the burden of the crisis on working people rather than increasing taxes on pandemic profiteers. So we need our movement's voice louder than ever in the next 6 days. Fundamentally, the mayor and the Democratic City Council are proposing an austerity budget. What is an austerity budget? It's a recession budget that cuts public funds for housing, services like parks, transportation, community centers, all the things that ordinary people and especially vulnerable communities rely on. It's a budget that protects profiting big business from further taxation by placing all the burden of the recession on working people. And the burden comes in what forms? It comes in the form of budget cuts. It comes in the form of job losses and so on. And we have to, this is Washington State. Aside from the Amazon tax, which we won for Seattle this summer through our grassroots movement, the city of Seattle, because of the Washington State laws and because we've not had political will from the Democratic Party, relies on regressive tax revenue sources like sales taxes, utility taxes, and taxes on small businesses. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. All of these taxes end up shrinking when there's a capitalist economic crisis. That's because during recessions, working people have even less money to spend than usual. Many have lost their jobs because of recession, and also because small businesses suffer disproportionately in recessions compared to big corporations that end up continuing to thrive. Now, I have heard council members saying that this will be an anti-austerity budget. That is simply not true. It's simply not true. It is true that the city of Seattle jobs aren't being cut this year, but programs and services absolutely are being cut. In fact, the city council's proposed budget will cut $187.2 million in basic services, reducing funding for libraries, parks, recreation centers, affordable housing, bus service, and road repair. Clearly, then, this is not an anti-austerity budget. Especially during this pandemic and economic recession, when tens of thousands of Seattle's residents are struggling to get by, it makes absolutely no sense to reduce public services, and yet that is exactly what the Democratic council members are proposing to do. In our minds, the choice is clear: an austerity budget or a people's budget. There's no other imaginary path forward. You either put the burden of the recession on working people, or you make sure that big business pays because they are cashing it in. That's why our People's Budget Movement and my office, we are proposing a budget amendment that will eliminate 100% of the proposed cuts by the Democrats by slightly increasing the Amazon tax, which we have already won. Another point which we have to take into account in our in our understanding of what's happening is that the Democrats on the council, a majority of whom pledged over the summer to defund the bloated police budget by 50% and fund social needs instead, are now failing to do so. There is some cut to the police budget. There's no question about that, and we should make sure we have our numbers accurate. But it's also true that it is far from 50%, far from 50%. And in fact, no officers are being reduced. So that's a very important point to take into account, because as our community and as the Black Lives Matter movements made very clear, it was both about taking money from a bloated police budget and instead funding community needs, but it was also about addressing the problems in the way repressive policing works in our city, because it's not working, precisely because it's not working. So without reducing a single officer, it is not going to be possible to even begin to address the problems that exist with racially biased policing and the continual harassment of protesters, poor people, homeless neighbors. Unfortunately, our Socialist Council office has been the only office that has consistently fought to defund the bloated budget of the police by 50% and fund the needs of Black and brown, working class, and poor communities. And in addition to the 50% defund demand, which we absolutely are going to put forward, and this will come up in the committee meetings this week, we are also in solidarity with the solidarity budget and the organizations that are organizing around the solidarity budget. We have put forward an amendment demanding, at a bare minimum, the city council ensure that there are no new cops in 2021. So that would enable us to save $9 million by not hiring any new cops next year, because we don't need it. We have a bloated budget to begin with for the police. And instead, those $9 million can be used towards community initiatives. If you're going to be listening to the budget committee discussions over the next 2 days, you will very likely hear council members speak at length about the sacrifices and pain everyone is experiencing under COVID. But we know not everyone is struggling to pay the rent, put food on the table, and stay out of the hospital. I mean, most of us are facing unprecedented hardship, but there are some who are living it up even through this pandemic. Under capitalism, pain, along with everything else, is distributed extremely unequally. Working people are suffering under COVID, the deepest recession since the Great Depression. This is a twin crisis, and tens of millions of Americans are out of work. More than 30 million renters are at risk of eviction. 1 in 10 in this country do not have enough food to eat. COVID is disproportionately sickening working people who can't socially distance, such as healthcare workers, grocery store and restaurant workers, who also often happen to be workers of color. And so we know that our community is disproportionately suffering. On the other hand, life is pretty good right now for the wealthy, for corporate executives and big shareholders. Stock market is at record levels. Many companies are reaping big profits. Amazon has made $11.5 billion, that's the billion with a B, $11.5 billion in profits since April. What happened in April? It was the beginning of the pandemic. So since the pandemic began, since our suffering was spiked up, Amazon has actually had a spike in its profits. While 20,000 Amazon workers have been sickened with COVID, some of them have died, CEO Jeff Bezos has seen his personal wealth skyrocket 63% this year alone to a mind-boggling $184 billion. Other tech companies like F5 and Salesforce have shattered Wall Street expectations also with staggering profit reports. And it's not just tech companies. Starbucks, which ended up furloughing and laying off workers, has just reported massive quarterly profits of nearly $400 million. All of this underscores how important it is for us to keep up the class struggle through movements like the People's Budget. The crisis of the pandemic and the financial devastation we know is not going to be resolved anytime soon. We're just going into a new phase of lockdown. We cannot put our faith in either big business and the wealthy or their political representatives. We need to build our own independent movements, and our movements need our own political representation in the form of a new party for working people and marginalized communities. I'm going to turn it over now to Jonathan, community organizer in my office, who will go through the budget fight in more detail. And don't worry if you miss any detail in the presentation. It has been posted online on my office's blog, so you can access it anytime. Jonathan?
Great. Thank you, Shama. And I'm going to jump right into our presentation here. As Shama has said, this is the last meeting before crucial votes later this week. So it's important that all of you are here discussing and figuring out how we fight for a budget that rejects austerity and funds social needs. As Shama mentioned, this is the 7th year of our People's Budget movement. We started the first year of our Socialist City Council office in 2014, and we have a track record of winning crucial victories, and that's everyone's victories. Affordable housing, renter organizing, homeless services, tiny house villages, restorative justice, Indigenous Peoples Day, and so on. As Shama mentioned, we are on track this year to win in a number of areas. And I think one of the most significant breakthroughs is working with Africatown and community allies to win $250,000 to begin work on this vital Yesler Way project that we're going to hear about later in the evening from King Garrett. We also got back $30 million for anti-displacement community development projects. This is money that the mayor promised last year and then rescinded her promise in this year's budget. We won that money back. So far, we've won 4 new tiny house villages, including one self-managed by Nicholsville. And we've won funding for the Share Wilt 24-hour shelter to continue operations around the clock. As Shama mentioned, we've won new funding for tenant outreach and organizing, $500,000, and even more than that to hire more eviction defense attorneys to work with tenants who are facing a tsunami of eviction threats from landlords in 2021. We're going to be requesting through this budget that the city develop standard terms for residential leases and also design transferable rental history background checks, so you don't have to apply for a background check every time you look for a new apartment. We're also on track, as Shama mentioned, to win funding for the Green New Deal Oversight Board, which we won in last year's budget, but was an unfulfilled promise by the mayor. And so we put it back in the budget again this year. And we've also continued to win low-income senior meals and cultural programs. And as Shama mentioned, the new Licton Springs signage, which honors the Indigenous history of our area. This is actually one of the most significant things, and it doesn't even have a dollar figure attached to it, that through this budget, we're on track to get the city to begin to draft legislation for an elected community oversight board over the police with full powers, including the power to hire and fire, investigate, and subpoena police and records. This is an extremely crucial step for our community to gain accountability over the police. And as Shama mentioned, we're not the trailblazers in that respect. Other cities, voters in other cities have just instituted community oversight boards over the police. But as Shama mentioned, the 2021 budget also offers a sobering reality that fundamentally we are looking at an austerity budget with cuts totaling $187 million to libraries, parks, recreation centers, affordable housing, reduced bus service, and delayed and canceled road repair work. An austerity budget is a budget that does two things. It cuts public funds, and secondly, it protects profiting big businesses. And in our budget this year, we're on track overall to have a budget that fits that description. Aside from the Amazon tax, which we won, as Shama mentioned, this past summer through the grassroots movement, Seattle relies on a regressive tax structure, sales taxes, utility taxes, small business taxes that fall disproportionately on the working class, and all of which shrink when there's a capitalist economic crisis because working people have less money to spend and small businesses suffer disproportionately. Here are some of the specific cuts in the Democrats' proposed austerity budget. First, they proposed to end the emergency COVID grocery vouchers in April this year. And we're not going to win this fight this fall, but we're going to have to come back in the winter and renew this fight because we cannot afford to have people lose their grocery vouchers come April. The Democrats are also proposing nearly $47 million in cuts to affordable housing, construction, and related services, $41 million in cuts to community centers in the form of deferred park maintenance and construction, closed community centers, deferred construction or rehabilitation at community centers, and so on. Another $6 million in cuts comes through planned library hours reductions and deferments of technology upgrades. And then finally, the biggest single chunk is $94 million in what's called Department of Transportation, but that really means cuts in bus hours, delayed construction projects, including notably the waterfront project that will be delayed under the budget proposal the Democrats have put forward. Now, we know the city council can easily stop all of these budget cuts. It's really a choice. First, they could increase the Amazon tax on major corporations, which fall on Amazon, of course, and other major corporations in our city. These companies have disproportionately enriched themselves during the pandemic. And then secondly, we can defund the police department, the bloated police department, and put the money into community-led programs, including restorative justice and affordable housing. Now, you may be asking, can we really succeed in stopping the cuts and making big business pay? And we have to be clear, this is very much an uphill battle, but we do need to keep building the public pressure on the Democratic Council members around our demands. And even if we don't win all of our demands this fall, fighting back and building movements always moves our class struggle forward. And we know this from our recent history. So many of you were involved 2.5 years ago when we won the Amazon tax in May of 2018, but it was almost instantly repealed by the Democratic political establishment when they refused to push back against the big business pressure that came after the initial passage. But we didn't admit defeat in 2018. We could have, but instead we picked ourselves up. We won re-election last year against a multi-million-dollar campaign by Amazon and the Chamber of Commerce. And then we went on this past summer to win the Amazon tax at an even greater level, much greater level than the 2018 tax. And this was in the midst of the Justice for George Floyd rebellion. So we know that when we fight and when we don't give up, we can win. We know that the crises of the pandemic and the economic devastation that working people are experiencing are going to continue the rest of this year, next year, and for the foreseeable future. So we cannot afford not to get organized and not to fight to ensure that billionaires pay for the crisis of their capitalist system and not us working people. Now, we've talked about a number of the things that we've won so far. Here are the things that we've got to be focused on advocating for the rest of this week, certainly. Our People's Budget Movement is demanding another $7 million for 5 new tiny house villages in our city. We've won funding, as you heard, for 4. We need more tiny house villages. These are a proven, effective way to help people who are struggling get off the streets and into some stability. And we need to see more tiny house villages built. We're going to hear about that later tonight from folks from Nicholsville and also from Lehigh. We also need $1 million to fund Green New Deal electrification projects for low-income households, which is actually an additional $800,000 on top of a small amount that the Democrats have agreed so far to put into this year's budget. These are minimal demands to get Seattle oriented in the right direction of getting people off of fossil fuels and onto clean electricity. And we are continuing to fight to restore funding for all the Democrats' budget cuts, the $187 I mentioned before, by increasing the tax on Amazon. Additionally, our budget demands that we stop the sweeps of our homeless neighbors. And as we mentioned before, defunding the police by 50% and using the proceeds for the community. And at the very least, if we can't win a 50% defund, we need no new cops in this city. And to use the $9 million that the current Democratic budget plans to allow new hires in the SPD, instead take that $9 million and put it into funding community-led programs. Just to give you an example or to drill down on some of the details around the SPD cuts. On the right-hand side of this chart, you see what the Democrats have proposed, which is about $29 million in real cuts to the SPD budget, which this year is a little bit south of $400 million. So it's not nothing, but it's a fairly small percentage. Our People's Budget demand builds on that. In order to get a full 50% defund, you add 29 million, you add 151 million to that figure, and that is half of the police budget. That is how much we'd have to cut to actually achieve a 50% defund. And then on top of that, our No New Cops proposal, advanced by Councilmember Shama, with the support and solidarity of the Solidarity budget, King County Equity Now, and the community. No New Cops, $9 million. That is what we are demanding in total, that bar chart on the left-hand side. But you can see there's a stark contrast between what the Democrats are proposing on the right and what the People's Budget is demanding on the left-hand side. Now, people also say, well, can Amazon afford to pay a little bit more? So we actually did a calculation. We looked at Amazon's profits in just the last 6 months. And this graph or this chart symbolizes every dollar is $50 million in profits for Amazon since April 1st, 2020. If we were able to increase the Amazon tax in the 2021 budget in order to wipe out austerity completely, Amazon would have to pay approximately $50 million, maybe a tad more, their share to eliminate all austerity in the Seattle budget. You can see how much this actually comes to as a proportion of their profits in just the last 6 months alone. This is such little money compared to their exorbitant profits. I'll bet Jeff Bezos wouldn't even miss it. And speaking of Jeff Bezos, we know that US billionaires in the last 7 months, 8 months, have seen their net worth rise by almost $1 trillion. And that is staggering when you think about it. As Shama said, the crisis of the pandemic and the crisis of this capitalist recession don't fall equally on everybody in our society. They fall on working people. And people at the very top, like Jeff Bezos, have a very different experience. They are experiencing wealth and wealth growth that they've never had before in their lives. Now, the next 6 days are crucial. Wednesday and Thursday this week, the Budget Committee meets and begins to vote on the amendments, including the People's Budget amendments that we're putting forward that we've discussed. The meetings begin at 9:30 each morning, and the chair has said there will be 1 hour of public comment from 9:30 to 10:30. You can sign up beginning at 7:30 each morning Wednesday morning and Thursday morning. So please set your alarm clock and make sure you get up to sign up. In just a few moments, my coworkers in the council office are going to show you exactly how you can do this signing up. And then after Wednesday and Thursday, we are then on to Monday when the full city council votes on the 2021 budget. And we have to stay alert and vigilant and active up through that date, because even at the last minute, as Shama mentioned, we have to guard against any last minute shenanigans that other council members may pull to try to take a victory away from us. So we have to stay vigilant and stay active and be signing up for public comment as well on the 23rd. We know as a movement that when we organize and fight, we can win. Our experience tells us that. And that's our job for the next 6 days. Let's get out there. Let's make our voices heard. And let's win a people's budget for working people throughout our city. Finally, I just want to note this presentation is available at the following tinyurl.com. It's We Need a People's Budget. And we'll get this out to you. We'll put this in the chats as we go through tonight, so you can refer to this if you want to in preparing your testimony, your phone calls, and your letters to council members in the next few days. Thanks very much. And now I'm going to hand it back to my coworker, Adam Zimkowski.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you, Shama. And yeah, thanks again to all the people watching. It's time now that we can, thanks for bearing with us. It's a lot of information for people to grapple with. We're going to go ahead now and move to the community speakers so we can bring together these people's budget demands and struggles, bring them to life. And then we're going to go over some action items, as Jonathan noted, including making sure people set that alarm for 7:15 a.m. tomorrow morning. I'm going to go ahead and move on to these community speakers. I just want to say it's so important that we noted, just systematically the victories that we're on track to win. And we're going to keep mentioning those throughout the rest of the event tonight. Those are victories that we're on track to win as a result of our struggle that positively impact our lives, all of our lives, but in particular, the lives of working people, Black and brown communities, the most marginalized among us. And of course, we're going to build off of those victories and go on to bigger and better things. And even we can build, as Jonathan noted, with the Amazon tax repeal and then subsequent victory 4 or 5 times greater a couple of years later, we can even build out of our defeats. The next 2 speakers we have are among those who have fought hardest, not just on the people's budget, but also to win the Amazon tax that we won this summer, and which Jonathan and Shama correctly noted could, through just a modest increase, overcome the entirety of the $187 million in austerity proposed by the Democratic City Council members. So let's go ahead without further ado. Let's hear from Reverend Robert Jeffrey. He is the senior pastor at New Hope Missionary Baptist Church and an active member in this struggle in this community. So Reverend, please go ahead and take it from here.
Thanks, Adam. How you doing? I think that I don't have really much to say except that we have to get behind Shama and support the people's budget. We have to really do the work that is needed to make sure that the poor people and the people in the communities, inner city communities, are not ignored. In the recent election, the Democratic Party benefited from an overwhelming African-American vote and an overwhelming inner city vote. They have now won the White House because of people who voted in the 90% for the Democratic Party. And all Democrats will benefit from that vote. I just think that the time has come for people to understand that you can't continue to benefit from people and then ignore them. You can't continue to use them when you need them to leverage them for your advantage and then ignore them. And I think that the Democrats on the council should understand that. They should understand that it's time for them to do right by people of color. People of color have continuously and consistently done right by the Democratic Party. And even in this city, the mayor used the inner city community to get away with a corporate deal and used the fact that she was going to help inner city communities. I think that the constant use of African Americans to empower or to give an advantage to oneself, whether it's an individual or a business or anybody, is systemic racism. And I think that after getting that advantage, not helping and not understanding your responsibility to that community. So yeah, I think that now is the time to, as we look across the nation and see the Democratic Party now retreating from its original positions about defunding the police, its original positions about attacking systemic racism, and the debate going on in the House of Representatives about these positions being not something that the Democratic Party may or may not continue in. Now is the time to push harder, because the poor are still homeless. Many of them are still homeless, and we still have a problem with the inner city in Seattle. You still have a problem with displacement, large-scale displacement. These problems have to be dealt with, and so I support 100% the people's budget. I support 100% the things that have been outlined by Shama, and I support 100% the community organizations that are involved in making sure this happens.
All right.
Thank you,
Well, thank you, Reverend Jeffrey. Yeah, the role that Reverend Jeffrey and other community members have played in fighting back against this tendency from corporate politicians to say one thing and then do another, to make promises and then go back on them when it comes time to actually defund the Seattle police, or tax, do things like raising by a modest amount the Amazon tax in order to prevent austerity. And it really does, the establishment, Democratic politicians in the Seattle City Council really do rely on ordinary people not being still organized and powerful enough to really overcome those massive attacks that we've been seeing. But obviously, as Shama indicated, and as so many of you listening tonight have gone through, we are organizing. The People's Budget movement is an effort at changing that power structure and that dynamic. Our next speaker is Sharon Crowley, a rank and file member of UAW 4121, and a real example of somebody who's doing that organizing work and fighting back against these budget cuts, and also who can share responsibility with so many others for many of these victories. So go ahead, Sharon, and take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sharon Crowley. I'm an organizer and a member of UAW Local 4121. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak today. Our union includes over 6,000 undergraduate, graduate, and postdoc academic workers at UW. The work that we do as union members is central to fulfilling the University of Washington's teaching and research mission. Our members work on all kinds of different research projects, including helping to do research on the COVID-19 virus. So, as others have already said, COVID-19 is having wide-reaching economic consequences. We're seeing record levels of unemployment and a persistent recession. Workers everywhere are struggling to pay for their basic needs, to buy food, and to pay their rent or their mortgage. The eviction moratoriums in Washington State and in the city of Seattle have been really crucial in preventing many people from being displaced. But as we all know, these are only temporary measures at best. As the pandemic drags on, the rent and mortgage debt racks up, and the situation is poised to leave hundreds of thousands of people facing a mountain of debt, not to mention likely eviction as soon as January statewide and March in our city. So what does our mayor offer to the working people of Seattle? An austerity budget that would cut affordable housing, transit, and community programs that working people in Seattle need. An austerity budget that would not cut police funding and would balance budget deficits by redirecting funds from the Amazon tax, which is meant to fund affordable housing. As Shama said earlier, we are on track to win a better budget than what Mayor Durkan proposed, $250,000 to fund the Africatown Affordable Housing Project in the Central District, which is amazing, millions in relief for beleaguered workers, new funding for tenant organizing, which is crucial for our members for sure, and legal help against evictions, and also legislation to set up an elected board of community members to oversee the SPD and to hold them accountable. There's still more work to do. The city council budget proposal is still an austerity budget with cuts to necessary programs for workers struggling through this pandemic. Austerity budgeting does not work for working people. It harms working people. At the same time, it protects the wealthy and big corporations that have been raking in record profits during this COVID crisis. Long before the pandemic struck, the affordable housing crisis was already hitting our members hard. In 2018, we did a housing survey with our members. Over 80% of them reported being rent burdened, with many paying over 50% of their income in rent. We've already needed more affordable housing options in Seattle. Many of our graduate employee members are only employed for the 9-month academic year, so they have to either stretch their income to cover 12 months worth of expenses or try to find another job during the summer. A challenging prospect during this pandemic when many of the places that these folks would work are closed because they're small businesses, cafes, and restaurants. I am also a renter. I'm a renter in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. I pay really pretty exorbitant rent for an apartment in an aging and poorly maintained building. I'm lucky to be able to live in this part of the city, but this building has had many problems in the time that I've lived here. We've had plumbing problems. I've had black mold growing in a small storage closet. All of this because of the aging galvanized pipes that are falling apart in our building. They spring leaks here, they spring leaks there, they fix the leaks and the problem just moves to another spot. We've had other problems in our building as well. And many of us have been complaining to our property manager. Every time he says, "You're the only one who's complained about this." In fact, many of us have been complaining. And the reality is that the owners of the building simply don't want to fix the problems. They will only do minimal repairs. So the resources that are going to go toward protecting people from eviction and also to help tenants organize are really crucial to me personally and also to our members. Many of our members live in housing much like what I live in, and it's overcrowded and poorly maintained buildings, and the pandemic has only made these things worse. It may seem like a small thing. One of the big problems in my building is that the laundry machines, the washing machines, eat quarters without actually turning on the water. And it may seem like a small thing to lose $2 worth of quarters in a washing machine, but when there's a quarter shortage because of a pandemic, this actually becomes a really big problem. And I know I've talked to other folks, other members of my union, and people are dealing with things like this all over the place. Even things that seem like a small problem become much more difficult in a pandemic situation. It just pushes everything to a crisis point. We've seen this, with the housing issues in the city. We've seen this with economic issues in the city, and the pandemic has just made everything much worse. This is overall, it's an economic and more importantly, a human rights disaster in the making. Working people have been bearing the burdens of our capitalist system for too long. We all know that these burdens always fall heaviest on the most vulnerable among us. Poor people and BIPOC people who have already been dealing with displacement because of gentrification throughout our city. My union has long been committed to fighting for economic, housing, and climate justice. Right now, canceling mortgages and rent at the city and state level is a critical part of that. We need relief. We need real relief. The eviction moratoriums are not enough. Our union is very much in support and have been working to support the programs like the Amazon tax, canceling rent and mortgages in Washington State. We're very much here to push the city council to not to revise this budget so that it's not an austerity budget, to approve like money to actually bring relief to people, and to approve you know, the kinds of programs and relief that working people in the city need. Yeah, we just can't keep shouldering these costs. I'm urging the city council and am here to help push them to take meaningful action by enacting the policies and the progressive revenues that we all need. Now is not the time for austerity budgeting. Now is a time when we really need to take bold action. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you, Reverend Jeffrey, for speaking to those points so powerfully. And we're going to hear very soon from community leaders fighting around defunding the Seattle Police, around no new cops so that we can fund Black and Brown community needs, support for democratically elected community review board. But before that, I think by now we've heard enough about what this budget looks like, about some of the exciting stuff that we're winning, but also the stuff still yet to advocate for and build pressure around. Let's go ahead and do our first action item, which is actually just laying the basis for making this effective public testimony to the city council. Nick Jones is a community organizer in our event, going to show us how to sign up for public comment. Going to help us also make sure that we're up in time in order to do that. So go ahead, Nick, and take it away.
Thank you, Adam. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Yeah, my name is Nick Jones. I'm a community organizer in Councilmember Swan's office. Yeah, and kind of as Jonathan was discussing earlier, tomorrow we're going to have to rise bright and early to make sure all of us can really use our voices to create as maximum pressure on the city council as we go through these final votes. And to do that, we'll need to sign up for public comment, which will include getting to this page. But I want to, while everyone is here, really encourage folks to right now take out your phones or however you set your alarm in the morning, to really right in this moment set an alarm for 7:15 so you can be up and ready to sign up for public comment right when it drops at 7:30. We know that oftentimes big business and other lobbyists try to stack public comment. We're able to push back against that when our voices are really the first ones ready to get in line and be able to tell the city council we don't need austerity, we need a people's budget. So if you can do that right now, then post whatever chat you're in, build each other up. Definitely post if you're able to do that, and say that you've set an alarm to get signed up for public comments. We can all stand on each other's shoulders, which I think is incredibly important for building these movements, is the inherent solidarity within those. That's how I feel like I get inspired to do everything, is just listening to all the incredible speeches here from community organizers. So once you've been able to set your alarm, you're going to want to find this webpage, and I find it helpful signing up for public comment to just have a tab ready and already there, so we can just kind of hit refresh when I'm waiting to sign up. To do that, it's super easy. Hopefully folks have done it before. Usually I just type in Seattle public comment up in this search bar, generally whatever internet browser you're using. And it should be the top link, the seattle.gov link that just says public comment. folks just click that, and it should just bring you right to this page. And right now, this page is not terribly helpful, but it will become helpful 2 hours before the city council committee, where once you're here, you'll just scroll down and you'll see right here, it will say public comment sign up. And right here at 7:30 tomorrow morning, there's going to be a form where you can put in your name, your phone number, your email, and fill the whole thing out. And then you're just going to hit submit right when 7:30 rolls around. You'll get an email with where you are in line as a speaker with information about how to get on the Zoom call. And then you'll just want to jump right on there. And hopefully when the city council committee is happening, starting at 9:30, you will be one of the first to be able to give your public comment and fight for people's budget tomorrow morning, and hopefully the day after that. Always is this page for public comment. Nothing should change if you're able to get there tonight. Leave the tab open, set your alarm, and I look forward to hearing all your voices bright and early tomorrow morning. So I'll end there and I will kick it back to Adam. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for walking people through that. And yes, hopefully we hear from everybody who's watching and many more bright and early tomorrow for the public comment. Let's go ahead and move on. We've got each year the people's budget has fought to defund the Seattle Police Department and put that money to urgently needed community needs. Last year, together with youth activists from Creative Justice, Community Passageways, and Rainier Beach Action Coalition's Corner Greeters, we were able to take $522,000 away from the Seattle Police and put it to restorative justice that positively impact the lives of hundreds of young people. This year, obviously, as we've noted on several occasions, the massive uprising around the George Floyd protests changed the situation. And because of this mass movement, in the middle of the summer, we had the demand to defund police departments all across the country by 50% emerge in such a powerful way that 7 out of 9 council members, as has been noted, promised actually to make good on that demand. Unfortunately, as we've also noted, every other council member except the socialist on the city council, Shama Sawant, has gone back on that promise. None have supported the demand to defund that's being put forward by the People's Budget Movement and Shama Sawant to defund by 50% or 170 million. Despite that, as has been noted, our movement is winning and on the verge of winning several very important victories. $250,000 for Africatown to begin work on Yesler Way for affordable housing, $30 million that the mayor tried to take out for anti-displacement and gentrification, community development projects that was then had to be re-put back in because of the movement. And of course, a request for the city to draft legislation for an elected community board to oversee the police with full powers, including to hire, fire, investigate, subpoena witnesses. And this is extremely critical, especially given that we know on so many levels that the current quote unquote accountability is simply not working. And this reflects also, it should be noted, huge support in the polls. And as Shama noted, more than a dozen cities and municipalities passed some form of police oversight reforms. Concretely, and then we'll get to the community speakers, this demand for no more cops, $9 million that could go to Black and Brown community programs. And we'll hear from the founder of Wanawari as one example of that in just a minute, instead of the police and hiring new officers. So right now, let's go ahead and turn to our community leaders and activists on this issue. Let's start with very excited and honored to introduce Y. King Garrett. He's the president and CEO of Africatown Community Land Trust. So go ahead, Y. King, take it from here, please.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Or good evening, should I say. Yeah, good evening all. Appreciate the opportunity to be included here. We're in critical times. Appreciate the work of everyone, Office of Shama Sawant, constantly stepping up to fight for things that are going to benefit more of the people and not just a few of the people. The question that we're faced with, as a community, is, are there, Black people in the future of Seattle, in the Central District, and how or why, after 140 years, nearly 140 years of being here, do Black people not have any real significant equity? We know the answer to that question is that for over a century, decade after decade, there's been policies and practices from the government, from the private sector, that has systemically excluded, marginalized, and harmed our community, our people individually and collectively as a community and part of Seattle. The opportunity that we have here is, now that things have been disrupted by a pandemic, which is still based on the historical context and compounding harms of the previous policies and practice, our community is being disproportionately harmed along with other communities. But the opportunity in this challenge is for us to rise, embrace our power as individuals, as citizens, as communities within this larger community, to build a new normal rooted in equity. And when we talk about equity, we are not speaking about really just an esoteric or abstract concept, but really talking about equity in terms of ownership, and land being very critical to that, because all things that exist have to have some space to exist. Anything that is to grow has to have space to grow. And what we're talking about is maintaining and developing space so that our community that has been a part of Seattle for almost 140 years, rooted in the Central District of Seattle, is able to grow and thrive as a part of the future alongside other communities. In order to get there, there has to be bold and unprecedented investments to move us away from the existing conditions of de facto Jim Crow apartheid that exists in Seattle and Martin Luther King County, and is only being exacerbated. I asked the question, are there Black people in the future? Because for the past 30 years, there's been a clear trajectory to there not being Black people in Seattle. And those that are here may be relegated to subsidized housing, tiny home villages, and things of the such. We do not see that as an equitable future. And thus those who value equity, who value fairness, who value justice, must come forward to call for the policies, the investments, the choices that lead to a different reality where there are Blacks in the future, and the Blacks in the future are able to realize their full potential. And not just Blacks, but all communities. In order for Seattle to be a world-class city, it should be inclusive of the communities of the world that have made the city, helped make the city. And when we're talking about maintaining and attaining equity just in the neighborhood that we were reserved to and redlined into. We're really not talking about equity at the level of who owns the buildings downtown. How many of those buildings downtown are owned? How much commercial space is owned by Black people who have been here since before Washington was even a state? William Gross, the pioneer of the Central District, was a developer in 1880s. And now we have no developers of scale that are Black in the city, no general contractors of scale that we can find in the state to help build these projects, build our community, participate in these large scale capital projects. This is not due to any defect, natural, innate defects in the character of our individuals and community, but because there has been socially engineered structures and systems and policies which has really relegated our community to a place of second-class citizenship within the socioeconomic situation here in Seattle. And I think that, Seattle has a very liberal or progressive image that is marketed. But when we go to the numbers, the statistics around the wealth gap, the income gap, the homeownership gap, we see a major distance. We see our community being apart from the positive quality of life indicators and statistics. And this is why we say, well, this is really a situation of apartheid. And now is the time for a different path to be charted, different choices to be made, different investments, and the work of so many people in the streets, organizing themselves of all walks of life, demanding a different type of future. And we have elected officials such as Shama who have risen to take that energy and help bring it into the places where decisions are being made on our futures. And so we're talking about unprecedented opportunity, which has been brought forth by Black-led community organizing, and a whole square block right across the street from Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute, a hub of Black culture, from Pratt Fine Arts and Pratt Park, named after a Black man who worked in the community, Edwin T. Pratt. A block from Bryant Manor, which is owned by First AME Housing and has been a place that provided access to affordable housing for our community for decades. This square block, formerly the Cairo Rehabilitation Center, which served primarily Japanese and Pan-Asian community members, providing them culturally responsive senior care, but was sold, acquired by Bellevue-based developer to turn it into unaffordable market rate housing, almost 300 units, which would not have been accessible, which would not have been consistent with the equitable development goals that we hear promoted often: shared prosperity, equitable development, race and social justice in the city. And again, community, Black-led community organizing led to stopping that and halting that development from happening in that way. And now the community has the opportunity through Africatown Community Land Trust to acquire this property to, one, in the short term, meet the needs of our community members that are experiencing homelessness, not only by providing shelter and housing, emergency that's needed greater than ever with the COVID pandemic that is also disproportionately affecting our community, but to also co-locate culturally responsive Black-led resources and services providers to meet the unique needs of our community members and reconnect them to community and connect them with building community as well, rebuilding the community that many of them have been displaced from to the streets of downtown Seattle and couch surfing and throughout South King County. And so that would be the short-term opportunity that would be met and fulfilled. And secondly, long-term, to have a redevelopment of a square block in the Central District of Seattle that does meet the equitable development goals, that does provide access to affordable housing, and also honors the communities that have been displaced, including the Japanese Pan-Asian community, the Indigenous First Nations communities, and the Black community that has called the Central District home for over a century. This is unprecedented. And so we are appreciative that Councilwoman Sawant saw the magnitude of this opportunity and was able to move forward with helping to make sure that this opportunity is not missed, not just for our community, but for the city at this critical time when we talk about creating a project that demonstrates how our communities can be brought into the future. And so with that, I would just say that, you know, it's very important that we all embrace our power, the power of our voice, the power to send an email, the power to make a phone call, the power to express our desire to see a different future for Seattle, where it is a world-class city, inclusive of our communities of the world that are here and have been here, and not a one-class city that's exclusive to just white and wealthy, primarily. This is the opportunity that we have now, and it's going to take many hands and many people from all walks of life to shape that and build that new future. But we have to know that it's possible, but it also is not going to come about just through conversation, but through choices and through shifting of resources, redistribution of resources. You know, it shouldn't be a case where those who have the least are paying the most. So with that, just want to encourage all to express what you want to see. Say it through the channels, say it to the people that are making decisions about budgets and about policies that are going to make the city what it will be. We know what it has been, we know what it is, but it's up to us all to make it what it will be. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Y King. And let's go ahead and we are very honored to fight alongside you and those from Africa Town and so many others in the community. I just want
to make one more point just one more point. And that is, at this time when we have this unprecedented opportunity, we don't want to allow anti-Black racism to interrupt and derail the fact that this opportunity is before us. And it has been brought about by the Black community leading, you know, not just around this project, but for the last, 5 months of people being in the streets constantly, people organizing constantly, and people saying, no more. We have to have change. And so I want that to be also known, that oftentimes much of the resources, and this is another call, through the work of King County Equity Now Coalition, not only for land, but also for control of the resources that are to impact our lives. Although we're overrepresented in many of the statistics, such as homelessness and so on and so forth, the large share, over 90% of these resources do not go into organizations that are rooted in, led by, accountable to the communities that these resources are supposed to impact. And so again, this is an opportunity to move things in another direction where the communities that are most impacted are actually in control of the resources, identifying and implementing solutions to bring about a change in our current state of affairs. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that clarification, Y King. Without a doubt, if not for the massive Black Lives Matter movement led by the literally millions of Black activists in the streets, we're not having this conversation, and there is no possibility of such massive defunding, as Councilmember Sawan has put forward at the behest of the movement. Let's go ahead and move to Inye Wakoma, who is a lifelong Central District resident, journalist, artist, organizer, and co-founder of Wanawari. Let's go and go ahead, Inye, take it from here, please.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to testify at this hearing. So yes, as was stated, my name is Inye Wakoma. I'm a lifelong Central District resident, part of a multi-generational, at this point, 7 generations family living here in the neighborhood. And I'm also a co-founder of a community institution called Wanawari, which at this point is about 1.5 years old. And so Wanawari is a Center for Black Art, Stories, Social Connection, and Community Organizing in the Central District. It is located in a home that is owned by my family still. It's been in my family since the mid-1950s. And I started the project with 3 other friends and professional colleagues, primarily as a way to avoid the fate that so many Black homeowners have faced, which is having to sell their home due to the pressures of the rising cost of housing and homeownership here in the city. And so all the things that Y King enumerated in terms of the historical forces that have compelled or forced Black homeowners to sell their homes over the years, rapidly accelerating the pace of displacement and the disintegration of the Black community in Seattle, are some of the things that Wanawari is designed to combat and to create innovative solutions for the future that will help anchor our families and our community and our culture here in the city. And so the way that we do that, one of our taglines for Wanawari is the house that fights displacement with art. Art is used as a primary tool for activating the imagination, catalyzing excitement, and broadening the range of possibilities for people to imagine what can happen on the neighborhood level in terms of one, cultural anchoring, but 2, for Black homeowners that are in economic distress and may be facing pressures from developers or just facing a general pressure to sell their home. We serve as a demonstration model for what's possible in reimagining what land use looks like on the neighborhood level. And so as a community center, we do operate in a home that is zoned single family residential. And so there are a number of issues, policy issues with that, none of which are 100% insurmountable, but they are certainly for most people unattainable. So getting a home rezoned to do the work that we're doing in the home is something that the average homeowner could almost certainly never undertake, especially if they're already under economic distress. So our work at Wanawari, one, provides the kind of demonstration model for what was possible, but in doing so, we are also building a platform for Black homeowners and cultural workers to come together to become community experts on land use issues and to begin to imagine what kinds of policies we can advance to make government more responsive to the needs and the solutions that are emerging out of our community as we begin to imagine our future in this city. So, so that's the work that we're doing. It's work we've been doing for the past year and a half since we started. We started as a DIY project, totally self-funded. At this point, we have growing momentum in terms of community support, both in terms of folks making sure that we can continue to pay rent in the home, and that's an important feature of what we're doing. We started the project as a way of being able to pay rent into the family so that they could afford to keep the home. But also in terms of the fact that there's almost been a kind of community mandate that we figure out how to persist and be sustainable as a community institution, seeing that at this moment in history, we're providing the kind of community service that is almost extinct in the city, which is a cultural space and a community space, an organizing space that's accessible, that's open source, that invites the community in to imagine not only the possibilities of the space, but the possibilities of human interaction politically, socially, culturally in our neighborhoods. And doing it in a way that then allows people to go back in the community and imagine possibilities for other spaces and on other fronts. And so at this point in time, we're really looking at what does it mean for the city to support this kind of work coming up out of the community. We are in a critical transition phase with the home. It is the previous sole owner passed away, which means the home is going into probate. We have an opportunity to purchase the home and make sure that it, one, stays accessible to the community, but also it also is a way to demonstrate the fact that there is real value in community solutions. And so as we began to work with organizations like Africatown CLT, King County Equity Now, Rainier Beach Action Coalition, and a host of other folks who are aligned with the work that we're doing on numerous fronts. We're looking at resonating, expanding our impact in terms of what this work looks like, how our work intersects with the specific work that other folks are doing, and how collectively we can build together. One of the biggest things that we like to emphasize, because we are looking for solutions for Black homeowners, is that as the city begins to, or continues to grapple with the housing affordability crisis, most of the solutions that have been presented for our community have been based on providing opportunities for folks who are under pressure for potentially being homeless or are homeless, or have been forced out of the neighborhood to become renters in the community where their families historically were property owners. We believe that, one, we need to anchor Black homeowners that are still in the neighborhood. We believe that there is no more affordable housing than the homes that people already own. We believe that Black homes have historically been places that have been mixed use and dense, housing families and people of multiple generations under the same roof. That Black homes have always been a kind of transitional housing, providing shelter for folks who are temporarily economically unstable. So there are a whole host of issues that come into play when you have Black homeowners who provide the kind of flexible and fluid mutual aid network that's vital for our community and our city to be healthy. And so in our work to anchor Black homeowners, we're looking at supporting the work that Africatown CLT is doing in terms of providing these large scale development projects that provide, the kind of frontline support that folks need in the immediate and also in the long term. As you look at, projects like Liberty Bank and what's happening, will be happening with their project at Midtown Center. But we're looking at where we fit in with that. Where Black homeowners fit in with that, how Black homes can, in a new and vibrant way, be mixed use, live and work in cultural space that provides an additional amenity for folks that will have the opportunity to move back into the Central District. And we state that as a declarative reality for the future, that our people will be able to move back into the Central District. And that's the work that we're here to do. And so as we engage in this effort to advance a solidarity budget to advance a people's budget, to reimagine what public safety looks like, to expand the notions of public safety, to account for the fact that when people are healthy, have safe places to be, they're less likely to engage in actions and behaviors that basically emerge out of their desperation. That is a function of public safety. And so, we want to be a part of that solution set. And so engaging in this work, engaging in this effort now to advance the people's budget and the solidarity budget is our way of really doubling down on the work that we're already doing, encouraging the city to step up. For those that have been reticent to engage in community solutions, encouraging those that have expressed support for community solutions to double down on that commitment and to show some courage to divert some of the dollars that have been used to oppress and displace our people, to invite folks to bring their solutions to the table so that we can re-anchor ourselves in this city. So that's the work of Wanawari. And that's where we are now. And thank you for allowing me to say a few words.
Okay, thank you so much, Inye. And it's abundantly clear that instead of continuing to feed the bloated Seattle Police Department budget, they should not hire new cops, and they should instead fund programs and community needs that like the ones that are provided by Wanawari. Let's go ahead now and hear from Castile Hightower, who's the sister of Herbert Hightower Jr., who was killed by Seattle police in 2004. Castile, go ahead and take it from here, please.
Thank you, Adam. As I speak to you tonight, my thoughts are on my brother. How because his life was stolen, he isn't here to celebrate the powerful and empowering uprising that occurred over the summer. His life, like so many others, was stolen from him, not just by one police officer with a gun, but a system that has murdered so many people and will continue to do so if we don't stand up against it. He wasn't able to witness the historic protests in cities across the US chanting Black Lives Matter, saying to our communities, our elected officials, our criminal justice system, that by that decree, we demand freedom from racist oppression and to be liberated from the brutal, dehumanizing, and often deadly repressive forces that is modern day policing. The same forces that took my brother from me. During that same time, 7 out of 9 Seattle City Council members made a promise to the people that they had heard our demands to defund SPD by at least 50%. Of the 7, only Councilmember Sawant has held steadfast in that promise and introduced legislation, the People's Budget, that not only cuts SPD's budget by at least 50%, but also calls for a community oversight board that has the power to investigate, discipline, and fire officers, and ensures no new cops are hired and free up an additional $9 million for Black and Brown community needs, including $500,000 to Wanawari, a cultural space as described in the CD fighting decades of gentrification and displacement of African American residents. The People's Budget also includes legislation for housing, education, the Green New Deal, Indigenous Peoples Day funding, and mental health services, that of which could have been a life-saving resource to my brother. This week, the final votes from the council members will be cast, and we will find out which of them stand with or against the people they claim they serve, where they would choose austerity for so many already struggling communities hit by multiple crises at once, whether it be COVID, economic, housing, racial justice, and so many more, or if they would choose already inflated, hyper-militarized police forces that use the money given to them to brutalize peaceful protesters, then skirt any accountability. What I can do, what we can do up and until these votes are cast is continue to fight. Fight for a more equitable budget that addresses the needs of our communities. Fight for a world free from police violence and murder. A world that would have offered my brother mental health services and care rather than bullets and a casket. One that doesn't add insult to injury by continuing to refuse to release my brother's 16-year-old public records. Fight with me and my family and sign the petition alongside over 1,800 others demanding that they be released by Seattle police. Fight for a future that doesn't choose the police over our livelihoods and abilities to thrive and survive under COVID. So call and email your city council members, tag them on social media. Join me for public comment Wednesday and Thursday and tell them to support Councilmember Sawant and both the People's Budget Movement and Solidarity Budget Movement demands. No new cops, justice for Herbert Hightower Jr., Black Lives Matter, and reject the austerity budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Castile, for those incredibly inspiring words, and also to Joaquin Garrett and Inye Wakomo for offering such a clear and obvious example of why, again, the Seattle Police Department budget needs to be defunded so we can invest in Black and Brown community, why we need real accountability, including democratically elected oversight. And we're going to be putting the petition for justice for Herbert Hightower Jr. in the links in the live stream chats. Please sign it if you haven't already. We're going to move on. As Shama and Jonathan indicated, this budget process also has Green New Deal demands that we've been fighting for. I'm not going to go into much introduction on the need to fight environmental catastrophe. But this budget vote coming up tomorrow and the day after does give council members the opportunity to add a minuscule, in reality, increase to the Amazon tax in order to get the ground running in a real way on Green New Deal weatherization, and particularly to fund to the tune of $1 million getting this Green New Deal weatherization up and running. Let's go ahead and right now we'll hear from Rachel Heaton, who's an urban Native community activist fighting for the Amazon tax and fighting in this people's budget movement. So Rachel, go ahead and take it from here, please. And Rachel, if you are speaking, you are muted right now. All right, it's possible that Rachel is having some technological difficulties. So let's go ahead, and before we hear from Rachel, we can move on to our second action item. And we'll have Sasha, a community organizer in our office, go ahead and walk us through our second action item, which entails continuing to email council members in big numbers. Go ahead, Sasha.
Great, thank you, Adam. Thank you everyone who spoke earlier. I'm Sasha, a community organizer in Councilmember Shama Sawant's office. I'm also a member of Socialist Alternative. And as people before me said, we have a lot to fight for in this budget. Actually addressing the oncoming eviction crisis, funding the Green New Deal, defunding the bloated police budget by 50%, and instead funding the needs of Black and Brown community members. And there is widespread support for these demands. And we are on track to win many of our demands. We should remember that we have gotten this far by building a determined movement. And that's what it's going to take to win the demands that we have yet to win. So Nick already went through the first action step, speaking in public comment tomorrow morning. Sign up at 7:30 a.m., speak at 9:30 a.m., and the same thing on Thursday morning. But we know that these council meetings are not scheduled in a way that makes them accessible to working people. So if you are unable to call into public comment, or in addition to that, if you are calling in, we want to flood the council members' inboxes with emails. When the email inboxes are full of emails calling on, defunding the police or taxing Amazon, it really gives council members a sense of the scale of how many people are paying attention to this issue and advocating for it, and that we'll be watching them when they vote and ready to hold them accountable. So it's a really important part of creating that public pressure, of building that movement. Already our People's Budget movement in just the last, since this weekend, has generated over 200 emails on each of our key 3 demands. That's over 600 emails total to reject austerity and instead tax the pandemic profiteers, to fund the Green New Deal by taxing Amazon, and no new cops. And of course, the no new cops demand has also brought in over 1,000 emails from individuals and organizations on top of that. And that's just the emails from this weekend And throughout the budget process, there have been waves of emails about all of these topics. So right now, let's all take a moment to send the Seattle City Council members a message and flood their inboxes. I will post 3 tiny URLs in the live stream chats in just a moment. And Nick Jones from our office is going to walk through how to send these emails out. So yeah, let's continue to fight for a people's budget.
All right. While Sasha is posting those links in the chat, I will go ahead and start this little screen share. Again, this is Nick Jones from Shauna Solon's office. I'm also a member of Social Alternative. So when you click the link that Sasha's posting, it should bring you to a page that looks just like this. This is an email from our office that was sent out earlier. But the most important thing to focus on in this page is going to be this link right at the top. Send a letter to the City Council. Just as a lot of other speakers have said tonight, flooding the City Council's inbox with tons of messages calling for support for a people's budget is absolutely one of the most useful ways we can really leverage our collective power to, demand that they reject austerity to fund things we absolutely need, like tiny house villages, to tax big business for affordable housing, no new police, the whole gamut of things we've been discussing tonight, a Green New Deal. So once folks have made it here, just go ahead and click on this. You may have issues getting this to load, in which case just try a different link. Or I found that one of the 3 links Sasha has posted, or I found sometimes trying it in a new browser can also work. But you should just be able to click right here. Based in my browser, it asks me which email I want to open it with, because it's going to auto-generate an email to send to all council. So you might have a different dialog box here. Mine asks to open it with Gmail. If you are on your phone or something and you automatically use Gmail, it should just automatically open. But for me, I'm going to click on Gmail. And hopefully if you click that link on your computer, it might just automatically load. And it should bring you right here. You'll see it has council@seattle.gov in the 2. What this does is going to send an email to every council office in the City Council. So to make sure that we cover all our bases when we're sending these emails, and it should already be auto-filled with powerful talking points from our People's Budget movement, reflecting kind of the things we've been discussing tonight. Feel free, of course, to add whatever you want to this. You can say like I'm a renter in D2 that is struggling to pay my rent. Whatever your personal story, however you want to say it, that's also super powerful. If you want to add that, whatever you want to add, but we can keep and feel free to keep all of this that we've put together. Then you can just add your name, anything else you want to add, and then just go ahead and hit send. And that will, like I said, go to every inbox in the City Council and let them know that we reject austerity, that we support Green New Deal, that we want to fund affordable housing, that we want to tax big business, that we want to defund SPD, all the things that have been making it part of a people's budget. So yeah, please, if you have a moment just right now, send those emails, follow the links that Sasha has been posting. If you're having issues, just, try a different browser, try a different link, maybe try on your phone. Sometimes it can be a little clunky, but I've found generally it can be real smooth, and hopefully it's working really well for people. And hopefully tomorrow morning, right before this committee, the council is going to wake up and find all their inboxes full of messages of people from our movement demanding the things we need. So definitely, if you can do it right now, if your roommates are around, get them to do it. And I will kick it back to Adam to take us through the rest of the agenda. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick, for walking us through that. And yeah, it really does have an impact. The more emails the council members receive, and we'll be putting in a few different links, and you can send a few different emails because they're on different topics, all things that we've been talking about tonight that the city council should fund to support the interests of working people. And we've heard about our housing and our renter work that a lot of things that we're winning on, including 4 new tiny house villages, 1 self-managed, 500,000 for renter organizing, 650,000 for eviction defense. But there are a lot of things that we will need to defend that and actually seal the victories. But then we want full funding for tiny house villages. We want a stop of the sweeps of our homeless neighbors. And of course, we're still fighting to increase the Amazon tax to get rid of all of the austerity, including the $46.8 million, which is coming from the Office of Housing. Let's go ahead now and hear from a few exciting community leaders in this struggle against these cuts to housing and for the interests of homeless folks, renters. Let's begin with 2 residents from Nicholsville. We have Dan McGraw and Hannah Lake, both of whom are going to say a few words. Let's go ahead and start off with Dan McGraw, and then we'll move to Hannah. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey there. It's been a crazy year for the world and for Seattle. The response by the BIPOC community and allies to the outrageous murder of George Floyd was long overdue. It was another push forward against structural racism this country was. COVID-19 was different. It was more unexpected, and the solution is not so transparent in some ways. Both crises had something in common, though. Those who control this country politically and economically had no idea how to deal with them. These absence of a safety net for those who have a bad break or a bad loss. In some ways, homeless people, because we already have huge challenges, had less to adjust to this year than others. We were already getting screwed by the system. So our community, SHARE, already knew that for the damage they had caused in Seattle's housing market and the dramatic increase in homelessness. It was empowering to be part of the Tax Amazon movement, and it's time for large corporations to step up and do more. There's so much need in Seattle and so much wealth at the same time. We support some of that. Large corporations to the construction of tiny house villages. This year, the mayor didn't propose any, and the people's budget proposed 8 large ones and a diverse amount of smaller ones. That still isn't funded, and we need to push the politicians to do it this week. When COVID nighttime only shelters, some have been operating for over 2 decades. When COVID required everyone to stay home and close the libraries, day centers, restaurants, and most public activities, we had a real problem. Our hosts most to stay in their buildings 24 hours a day instead of just at night. And we learned something. COVID or no COVID, it is healthier too and less stressful to have a place to go 24 hours a day. SHARE thanks Councilperson Sawant for putting in an amendment to the budget, $655,000 to keep our shelters operating 24 hours a day. Hopefully no one messes with this money and we can stay in place 24/7. One of the few good things COVID did was make clear that the sweeps are so inhumane that the Centers for Disease no one be swept while the pandemic was in full swing. CDC recommended this was because sweeping people spreads COVID-19. Even when scientists called for any sweeps, though, our mayor still fought to keep sweeping homeless people. At least some progress has been made in cutting back on the navigation team and calling it something else. SHARE supports that homeless people can't be swept unless they are offered something better. And if they aren't, they have to be allowed to set up camp nearby. It's a good idea and we should support it. From the beginning, SHARE has also supported cutting the police department budget in half. They have far too much unchecked power to do violence already. We know there are better ways. It's disappointing to see people step away from this commitment. Again, thank you, Councilmember Sawant, and all your fellow support for the people's budget. And I just, everyone who spoke in this, it means a lot to me and it means a lot to the people that are also struggling with homelessness in this sphere. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Let's go ahead now and hear from Hannah.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Hannah Lake and I live at North Lake Nicholsville Tiny House Village. I'm here today because I believe that the people's budget is the best way for Seattle's money to be spent. A couple months ago, Nicholsville asked the city for $800,000 to fund our 2 existing villages, to open 2 new tiny house villages, and to support Share Wheels Tent City 3. We were so happy to see that the money was added to the people's budget. That persuaded other council people to support it too. For over 5 years, the people's budget has been a way for a diverse, progress, and grassroots coalition of people to win together what we can't win apart. When we join in, we always learn about other important struggles. We've seen that our success comes when we support each other in the struggle. This year, days after the People's Budget campaign started, we saw that community tiny house villages with self-management were cut out of the next step, the balanced budget package. As we had feared, the balanced budget package was too much like Mayor Durkan's budget. It was an austerity budget. Given the wealth in the city, we could do better. But it's not just being cheap that stops support for the democratic and grassroots efforts of homeless people. Another reason is that in a society where there are such dramatic differences in wealth and privilege, force is required to keep control. That is why the police need to be defunded by 50%, so that the powerful have less power, and so that people have to work together cooperatively, not some dominating over the others. That is why the Black Lives Matter demand to cut police budgets by 50% is so important. The mayor and Human Services Department only want to see one type of tiny house village, one that is undemocratic and top-down. This is because they see homeless people and feel that all homeless people need to be supervised or taken care of. They see homeless people as a lower class. That is why they think there needs to be a top-down system. For example, most villages in Seattle have a site manager, someone who's paid to make the important decisions of how the village is run. Nicholsville is different. It is run democratically by the residents, and through that, we gain a sense of responsibility, and for some, like me, it even inspires a feeling of purpose because every good thing that we do for the village benefits everyone in our little community. With all the proposed budget cuts to public services, affordable housing, bus services, etc., cutting out community tiny house villages like Nicholsville from the budget means that people who could have been helped by our villages will more likely remain on the cold, wet Seattle streets, and that is shameful. There is a better way. Instead of taking away funding from self-managed villages like ours, all we would have to do is make a slightly higher tax for businesses like Amazon. With a small amount of revenue from those who can afford it, not only will Nicholsville be able to expand and to help more people, there will be more resources for affordable housing, funding for Black community and art centers, and funding for other tiny house villages as they have been proven to be more successful than traditional shelters. Let me be clear, Nicholsville supports our own tiny house villages. We support Share's Tent City 3, and we even support the other more expensive tiny house villages. We need diversity, and we need plenty of tiny house villages. Sweeps of the homeless encampments need to stop. It just doesn't make sense to chase the homeless from place to place in hopes that they will go to a shelter. Some people might not feel safe or comfortable in that environment, or they might have a pet they don't want to part with. Many people have to give up many of their belongings when they are swept. Losing everything is so hard to come back from, especially when you are homeless. During COVID, it is unsafe to disperse encampments. The CDC has said that it causes the virus to spread more. Tomorrow, Wheels Women in Black will stand for another 13 homeless people who just in the last 2 weeks have died outside or by violence in King County. That is just in 2 weeks. That is at least 119 people who are homeless and have died outside or by violence this year. And that is a new and terrible record. This is why we fight. Together, let's make a city that is better than this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And it's a feeling of mutual respect on the part of our office and everybody, I think, in the People's Budget movement to have for so many years been able to fight alongside residents from Nicholsville and Share and Wheel and win real important victories. And you can see the results of winning. And then unfortunately, as you just noted, the results of a city council that continues to prioritize the interests of big business and neglect the interests of Black and brown communities, of working people, and then our homeless sisters and brothers as well. Let's go ahead and hear right now from Erica Merritt. Erica works for the Low Income Housing Institute as a special projects manager for TC Spirit Village in the Central District. and previously worked as a case manager at the same site. Erica, please go ahead and thank you so much for being here, and take it from here.
Thank you. I'm like, I'm muted. Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to say that, yes, I started in April when we built the tiny house village in response to one of the first, I think it was the first peak of the pandemic. And we were trying to respond and do to the homelessness crisis as well as the COVID crisis. And so I started there in April. The tiny house was built in 4 weeks. So I just want to make that point that it doesn't take long to build such a shelter, but we partnered with TC Spirit Church. And also we partnered with Chief Seattle, the Indian Center, and the Urban League. We take referrals from all 4 agencies. And when I first started as a case manager, I was working with the villagers on things like healthcare, employment, you name it. It's like a wraparound service. Anything that they needed, any barrier that they had, I worked one-on-one with them to get them just, feeling more, connected to society and feeling like they could be a valuable part of society. We've served over, we have 28 people in our village right now. We've housed over 8 of them. I can't explain. I'm a little bit in my head, I'm sorry, but I can't be more sincere when I say that they are the most vulnerable population, and having a house, a simple house to go inside and lock the door and call their own is totally invaluable. I just seen the change in people's lives of the course of the few months that I've been there. Now I've taken on the SPM position because I want to be even more involved and make sure that, we protect this tiny house villages and future tiny house villages. I can't explain and put into words how this change has affected these people in their lives. They're walking different, talking different, but most importantly, they feel valued. I wanted to also say that I wanted to thank Council Member Sawant for supporting the legislation to create these tiny house villages. And I'm hoping that she'll continue to do so because, like I said, I just can't put into words what a difference it's made, how much they feel safe. They were out there and they tell me they, felt like they were gonna die. And now they have a family, they have a village, and they have a community, and they have people who actually care and are dedicated to seeing them succeed in the finding housing. What else do I want to say? Look at my notes because I didn't really take much. I just want to say, we got behind the Central Area housing plan. It'll take the same spirit and political will to address these challenges that we continue to have. And I hope that we will continue to raise money to support more tiny house villages for the reason of just, being that community and being that change that we really want to see.
Okay, thank you so much, Erica. And we're nearing the end of our agenda here. I want to move now to Kate Rubin. Thank you for being on the call and for patiently waiting. Kate Rubin is the Executive Director of Be Seattle, and we've also worked a lot over the last few years with Be Seattle and more recently with Kate on fighting for renters' rights. Especially important right now during the COVID-19 crisis. So Kate, go ahead and take it from here, please.
Thank you, Anna. So we must recognize and address the direct connection between housing justice and racial justice. Due to Seattle's racist housing history, low-income Black and Indigenous people of color are more likely to be renters, and they are the first to be displaced. These communities were already disproportionately affected by the homelessness crisis before the pandemic even began, and renters are really struggling to stay housed. Even now, with the eviction moratorium in place, we've been supporting tenants whose landlords are trying to evict them anyway. Landlord lobbyists are pushing Governor Inslee to weaken the statewide moratorium and place the burden of proof of hardship onto renters. If you follow the Cancel Rent Law Twitter account, you may have seen that someone was advocating for landlords to burn their rental properties down and collect the insurance. These are the kinds of people that we're up against. Once the citywide eviction moratorium ends, we are anticipating a tsunami of evictions here in Seattle. Without Know Your Rights education, organizing, and advocacy, many renters will simply self-evict to avoid the hassle of the formal eviction process and going to court. How will your neighborhood look if nearly a third of your neighbors are forced out of their homes? What would Seattle be like if the artists, entertainers, students, grocery store clerks, service and hospitality workers, and other low-wage earners were suddenly gone? They've been keeping this city alive. Community-based organizations like Be Seattle and the Tenants Union of Washington, among others, need sufficient funds to fight back. Thanks to Councilmember Sawant and members of the community putting constant pressure on the City Council for the past month, as it currently stands in the 2021 budget, there is an additional $500,000 allotted for tenant outreach, education, organizing, and $605,000 for eviction defense attorneys, but that money isn't guaranteed. We need every dollar. We should not have to compete with other community enhancement projects for funding when we should be taxing big businesses and defunding the bloated and racist Seattle Police Department. If the City Council doesn't take action to ensure that there is sufficient funding for tenant support, we can expect even greater displacement of Black and Brown communities. We have to stand up for renters and invest in our community. It's essential to keeping people in their homes and surviving this pandemic. Let's keep fighting for our neighbors and the people's budget. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate. And I want to offer another, words of appreciation for all of our speakers. Unfortunately, we've just having technological difficulties. We're not able to get Rachel Heaton on the line to talk about the Green New Deal funding that we're continuing to fight for in this people's budget. But obviously, Shama and then Jonathan in the slideshow went through it. And the short of it is, through just a minuscule increase in the Amazon tax, we could get $1 million for Green New Deal weatherization. And we, of course, all know that if we don't move away from fossil fuels and urgently, then civilization as we know it in reality is not going to be able to continue. So obviously in this people's budget, we want to fight to make City Council actually put money towards that transfer, towards weatherization and from going from gas to electric to eliminate that fossil fuel. Thank you to our speakers, elevating those demands of fighting austerity by taxing big business, by defunding the Seattle Police by 50% to fund Black and Brown community needs. Thank you, of course, to the folks talking about the need for to fund homeless, services and encampments, for renter organizing and eviction defense. All of these things, of course, we want to make sure we communicate to City Council members. And in order to do so, we've got to wake up early tomorrow. Just send that last reminder out to people, 7:15, set your alarm so that you can sign up at 7:30 tomorrow. And then again, the day after to make these people's budget demands. The final budget votes are going to happen next Monday. So keep your eyes and ears open for information about that. And again, this is, of course, a celebration of the victories that we're winning because of the activism and because of our movement, but also it's, of course, a declaration of struggle made to the City Council member that they need to make good on their promises to defund the Seattle Police Department by 50% and fund Black and Brown investment. We're not going away. They need to raise the Amazon tax so that the $187 million in cuts to programs and communities that are important for working people do not come down on us, that we are not forced to pay the cost of this COVID-19 crisis, and obviously to secure the victories that we are winning, but to make sure that we win even more. So with that, I'll thank you again to everybody watching. We'll put up the splash screen that shows people the link for how to sign up for public comment, the Seattle channel link for how to actually watch the meeting and give comment. Of course, there is the PowerPoint presentation for people who, which was in the link for people who want this information. But yes, without further ado, I'll thank everybody and solidarity, and let's fight for a people's budget that attends ordinary people's needs and not the needs of big business. So thank you and solidarity.